I want you to imagine, just for a second, the highest stakes boardroom scenario imaginable.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
So we are talking about a legacy enterprise that isn't just failing to meet its quarterly goals. You know, it is actively, violently tearing itself apart.
Oh, so like total chaos.
Exactly. The regional offices are threatening to break away, the stakeholders are completely panicking, and the factions on the board are just at each other's throats.
Right, sounds like a nightmare.
It really is. Total organizational collapse feels not just possible, but like imminent. Now imagine a new CEO steps into this unprecedented mess.
Okay.
Instead of bringing in a comfortable, loyal team of internal allies to protect himself, this new CEO decides to fill the C-suite exclusively with the very rivals who just spent the last year trying to destroy him.
Just to get that top job themselves, right?
Yep. They all wanted the CEO job, and he hires them all.
I mean, that sounds like a blueprint for immediate corporate self-sabotage.
Doesn't it?
Yeah, because every instinct we have about executive survival and leadership during a crisis, it tells us to seek loyalty.
Right. You want your friends around you.
Exactly. We are wired to want alignment. We want deputies who have our backs, not people who have spent the last 12 months publicly declaring that they are vastly more qualified to run the company than we are.
Right. Like, if a modern CEO appointed 3 aggressive vice presidents who had just tried to oust him, the board of directors would view it as a massive vulnerability.
They'd think he was crazy.
They would. It sounds like the premise of a high-drama television show, but it happens to be one of the most masterfully executed leadership strategies in human history.
It really is.
So today, we're taking a granular look at Doris Kearns Goodwin's Pulitzer Prize-winning biography, Team of Rivals.
Such an incredible book.
It is. And, Goodwin has this incredible capacity to dissect the mechanics of leadership at the highest levels.
She really does. She won a Pulitzer for no ordinary time as well.
Yeah.
And her work producing historical docudramas is just phenomenal.
Yeah, she shows us the gears turning behind the decisions that actually shaped history.
She strips away the marble statues. She shows us the deeply human, highly tactical maneuvers of these figures.
Which is exactly what we need for this deep dive.
Yeah.
Because we are looking at the political genius of Abraham Lincoln, but we are doing it through a highly specific, very practical lens.
Right. We aren't here for just a standard history lecture.
No, definitely not. We are taking a chronological journey through Lincoln's political ascent and his presidency, strictly through a corporate lens.
I love this approach.
The mission today is to extract the actionable, hard-hitting takeaways from each phase of this journey. Takeaways that you, our listener, can take directly into your own boardroom.
Or your team meetings, or, just your long-term career strategy.
Exactly. But we need to set the historical stage first to understand the magnitude of this management crisis. So the year is 1860.
Okay.
The United States is that failing corporation. It is teetering on the absolute brink of civil war. The nation is fundamentally fractured over the institution of slavery.
The stakes are literally existential.
Right. And the country desperately needs a leader with an unprecedented capacity to manage chaos.
But before we can understand how Lincoln managed the rivals in his eventual C-suite, we have to look at the competitive landscape.
We have to understand who these men were.
Exactly. And how they all ended up competing for the same CEO job, the 1860 Republican presidential nomination.
So to understand the executive mindset of the mid-19th century, what do we need to look at?
Well, you have to look at a cultural phenomenon that defined that entire generation. It was this shared, palpable ambition known in the sources as the longing to rise.
A longing to rise. I like
Yeah.
that.
It was an era of rapid economic, technological, and territorial expansion. You had the telegraph changing communication, railroads completely changing commerce.
So the whole world was basically opening up.
Right. And young men venturing west weren't just looking for basic employment. They were driven by a profound, almost obsessive desire to improve their social standing.
They wanted to make a permanent mark on a rapidly expanding world.
Exactly. It was a fiercely competitive environment where upward mobility was suddenly possible on a massive scale.
They all have this absolute fire in the belly. But if we pull up their resumes in 1860, the contrast between them is just staggering.
Completely night and day.
Let's look at the absolute frontrunner for the job first, William Henry Seward.
Okay, Seward.
Born into immense privilege in 1801. He is academically gifted, attends Union College, and builds a career as a governor and a senator.
Very impressive on the paper.
Very. He is disciplined, he is emotionally outgoing, and he has the most elite, top-tier social connections available in American politics.
So if we translate Seward to a modern corporate context, he is basically the Ivy League legacy hire.
Yes, exactly. He has the pristine LinkedIn profile, the endorsement of every major player in the industry, and he has essentially been groomed for the corner office since birth.
And he had a remarkably optimistic outlook, too. He was deeply respected for his intellect and his decades of public service.
Everyone in the political establishment basically assumed the job was his by right.
Right. Then you have Salmon P. Chase, who was the governor of Ohio.
Okay, tell us about Chase.
Chase is a brilliant legal mind, but his personality profile is entirely different from Seward's.
How so?
Well, he is supremely confident, but highly solitary. He is laser-focused on his own advancement to the point of actually alienating his peers.
Oh, so he's that hyper-competent executive who eats lunch alone at his desk,
Exactly that guy.
completely ignoring team morale while plotting his next strategic promotion.
That is the exact profile. He viewed every interaction as transactional.
Wow. Okay, who else?
And then you have Edward Bates. He was a seasoned, highly respected statesman in St. Louis.
So he's sort of the older guard.
Yeah, Bates represents the older, established guard. He balances a very intense political ambition with a deep commitment to his large family.
Which gave him a sort of patriarch status in the party, right?
Exactly. So these three men, Seward, Chase, Bates, they are the undeniable giants of the political landscape.
They have the pedigree, the national recognition, and the established infrastructure to run a massive campaign.
Right.
And then we pull up the resume for Abraham Lincoln.
The ultimate internal dark horse candidate.
The darkest of horses.
Mhm.
Let's be honest about what his credentials actually look like in 1860.
They weren't great compared to the others.
No, not at all. He's been living in a modest home in Springfield, Illinois for 25 years. He doesn't have an Ivy League degree. In fact, his formal schooling totals about 1 year.
Just 1 year.
Yeah. And he operates out of a notoriously dusty, disorganized law office with his partner, William Herndon.
Right. Very unglamorous.
And he is widely known to be a somewhat melancholic figure. He doesn't have generational wealth or elite East Coast connections at all.
His national reputation is really only a few years old at this point.
Exactly. It was primarily built off the back of his 1858 debates with Stephen Douglas.
And those debates were crucial because they showcased his ability to logically dismantle the expansion of slavery, which is what united the disparate factions of the new Republican Party.
Right, but compared to the towering resumes of Seward or Chase, Lincoln's credentials looked incredibly thin to the establishment.
Oh, absolutely. But here's the thing. What Lincoln lacked in elite networking, he completely made up for in structural relationship building.
Okay, unpack that for us.
During those 25 years in Springfield, he was fundamentally ingraining himself in his community.
He wasn't just sitting in an office.
No, he was traveling the judicial circuit. He was staying in cheap taverns, telling stories, and building this fiercely loyal, geographically expansive circle of friends.
Friends who felt deeply understood by him.
Exactly.
Wait, if we apply this to a modern corporate ladder, this fundamentally flips the script on how we are taught to network.
It really does.
Because we are always told to network upward. You schmooze the board of directors, you get FaceTime with the regional VPs, you optimize for visibility among the elite.
And that is exactly what Seward did.
Right. But Lincoln networked horizontally and downward. He built a base of support so wide and so deeply loyal that the top of the organization eventually had no choice but to acknowledge him.
It is a brilliant distinction. Vertical networking gets you recognized by the people currently in power. But horizontal networking builds the actual operational machine you need when a power vacuum opens up.
That is so true.
Political experience or, a stacked corporate resume, it doesn't always guarantee success when the fundamental nature of the organization is shifting.
Because the old rules don't apply anymore.
Right. The contrast between these men highlights the difference between naked ambition and authentic connection. Chase and Seward were undeniably ambitious, but their ambition was clearly perceived as self-serving.
Whereas Lincoln possessed a humility that allowed people to project their own hopes onto him.
Exactly. He didn't just want the power. He wanted to understand the people who would be affected by that power.
Which gives us our first major corporate takeaway for the listener today. Authenticity scales better than pedigree.
I love that phrasing.
Thanks. I mean, when you are vying for a major leadership position, it is so easy to obsess over optimizing your title.
Oh, yeah. Getting that specific certification or forcing your way into elite networking circles.
But Lincoln proves that cultivating deep, authentic connections at the ground level, like actually being interested in your colleagues' day-to-day challenges, builds a structural foundation of support that is far more resilient than an impressive resume.
Because people will ultimately champion a leader who understands their daily operational reality over someone who just looks good on paper.
Exactly.
Those ground-level relationships become your intelligence network. When crises hit, the leader with the horizontal network knows exactly what is happening on the factory floor.
While the leader with the vertical network only knows what the board is panicking about.
Precisely.
Okay, so let's transition into how this underdog actually captures the CEO seat. The groundwork is laid, the relationships are built. We move to May 18th, 1860.
The Republican National Convention in Chicago.
This is the ultimate corporate boardroom showdown. And the contrast in how these candidates behave on the eve of the vote is just a masterclass in operations versus optics.
It really is a study in contrasting psychological states. So let's look at William Henry Seward first.
The front runner.
Right. He is so supremely confident in his front-runner status that he isn't even in Chicago.
Wait, he didn't even go.
Nope. He is at his home in Auburn, New York. And he is so certain of the outcome that he has literally already ordered a cannon to be fired on his lawn to announce his victory.
You have got to be kidding me. A cannon.
A cannon. And he is organizing a massive celebration for his neighbors. He assumes the math is already done.
Wow. And what about Chase?
Chase, true to his personality, is waiting in complete, anxious solitude.
So Seward is basically the executive who is so focused on drafting his inaugural company-wide email that he completely forgets to check if the board actually has enough votes to approve his promotion.
That is the perfect analogy. He is managing the optics of his victory rather than the mechanics of it.
Meanwhile, Lincoln is back in Springfield, and he is fully aware of the fragility of his position.
Very aware. Lincoln is pacing the streets. He is struggling to focus on any legal work.
I can imagine.
He wanders over to the Illinois State Journal office to talk to his friends and obsessively checks the incoming telegraph dispatches.
He's just waiting for any scrap of news.
Yeah, and he is actively managing his own expectations and the expectations of his local supporters. He tells them, quote, "I'm very hopeful, but don't be excited."
Try and keep everyone grounded.
Right. At one point, the physiological tension gets so high, he just throws up his hands and says he might as well just go back to the office and practice law.
He is grounded in the reality that he might actually lose.
Yes.
But while Lincoln is nervously pacing in Springfield, his team in Chicago is executing one of the most ruthless, brilliant operational strategies in political history.
Oh, it was incredible. This wasn't just hoping for the best, it was surgical.
Surgical is the right word. Tell us about David Davis.
So Lincoln's campaign manager was this massive, brilliant political operative named David Davis. He set up a command center at the Tremont House Hotel in Chicago.
Right in the middle of the action.
Yes. And while Seward's people were loudly parading through the streets with marching bands, acting like they had already won.
Lincoln's team was doing the unglamorous, exhausting math of vote counting.
Exactly. They mapped out the entire convention and identified the crucial swing states, specifically Indiana and Pennsylvania.
They knew exactly where the weak points were.
They knew that if Seward didn't secure an absolute majority on the very first ballot, his momentum would stall.
And they used every tactic available to manufacture momentum for Lincoln. I mean, they literally printed hundreds of counterfeit convention tickets.
Yes, that is one of my favorite details.
It's so wild. They handed them out to Lincoln supporters and told them to pack the gallery of the Wigwam, which was the building where the convention was held.
And they did this long before Seward's sophisticated East Coast supporters even finished their breakfast.
So when the convention opened, the room was just deafeningly pro-Lincoln.
They created a sensory illusion of inevitability to counter Seward's paper inevitability.
But the core of the strategy wasn't just noise, right? It was positioning.
Yes, David Davis and his team went to the delegates from those swing states and made a highly calculated pitch.
What did they say?
They didn't aggressively attack Seward. Instead, they pointed out that Seward was too radical on certain issues to win the general election in moderate states.
Ah, so they played on the fear of losing the general election.
Exactly. They positioned Lincoln not as the most glorious candidate, but as the most acceptable candidate to all the warring factions.
The strategy was to be everyone's second choice.
Precisely. And when the first ballot was counted, Seward was in the lead, exactly as expected. But he didn't hit the majority threshold.
And this is the mechanical genius of the convention system. Once a frontrunner stalls, panic sets in.
Complete panic. The delegates realize they have to back a winner, and if it isn't Seward, they look around the room for the next safest bet.
Because Lincoln's team had quietly built relationships with the Pennsylvania and Indiana delegations, assuring them that Lincoln was a moderate who wouldn't destroy the party's chances. Those delegates shifted their votes.
Yep. On the second ballot, Lincoln surged.
And by the third ballot,
The dam broke entirely. Lincoln secured the nomination.
it's just amazing. He out-operated a giant simply by presenting himself as the solution to the convention's gridlock.
He really did.
Which brings us to a massively important corporate takeaway for our listeners: the power of being the consensus second choice.
This is such a crucial lesson.
In corporate culture, we are aggressively conditioned to believe that to get the promotion, you have to be the loudest voice in the room. You have to be the aggressive self-promoter who demands to be everyone's first choice.
But aggressive self-promotion almost always generates friction, and it creates enemies.
Exactly.
If you are constantly forcing yourself to the front, you are naturally alienating peers who are also ambitious.
Yes, all right, to build on that, Lincoln proves that you can secure incredible power through thoughtful planning and behind-the-scenes collaboration.
Absolutely.
If you can position yourself as the unifier, the one person who can bridge the gap between marketing and engineering, or between the legacy executives and the new tech hires, you become indispensable.
You don't need to win the ego contest. You just need to be the strategic solution to the company's internal gridlock.
Right. It requires extreme patience and a willingness to let someone else take the spotlight during the early rounds.
But as the 1860 convention proved, the quiet consensus builder often walks away with the ultimate authority.
So the underdog secures the nomination, runs a highly disciplined general election campaign where he largely stays quiet and lets his party infrastructure work for him. And in November of 1860, Abraham Lincoln wins the presidency.
The CEO job is his.
But winning the job is actually the easy part. Because the morning after the election, he looks at the board and realizes that if he doesn't immediately pacify the warring factions, there won't be a country left to govern.
The situation was dire.
This forces him into a decision that defies every instinct of executive survival.
Right. The environment he woke up to was one of unprecedented national crisis. Southern states were actively preparing to secede.
The economy was destabilizing.
And internally, the newly formed Republican Party was a fragile coalition of former political enemies.
Just to understand the gravity of this, you have to realize that the Republican Party at this time was essentially a startup formed by merging deeply opposed legacy companies.
That's a great way to put it. You had former Whigs who generally favored a strong federal government and internal improvement.
And former Democrats, who traditionally favored states' rights and a strict interpretation of the Constitution.
They were only united by their opposition to the expansion of slavery.
So the moment the election is won, that single unifying glue starts to dissolve, and the ideological fault lines threaten to crack the whole thing wide open.
It was a powder keg.
Any normal executive in this situation stepping into a volatile crisis would immediately build a protective wall.
You would hire your most trusted allies from Springfield. People who will validate your decisions, protect your ego, and enforce absolute loyalty.
But Lincoln sits down to draft his cabinet, and he intentionally writes down the names of his three most bitter rivals.
It is stunning. He selects William Henry Seward to be Secretary of State.
He selects Salmon P. Chase to be Secretary of the Treasury.
And he taps Edward Bates to be Attorney General.
He also brings in prominent former Democrats and former Whigs, ensuring that every volatile ideological corner of this new party is sitting at the same table.
The environment was just chaotic. There was a rush of eager office seekers inundating Lincoln's receptions, demanding positions. But he held firm on these core appointments.
Let's pause on that, because strategically this is deeply counterintuitive.
Oh, completely.
Like we said earlier, if a modern CEO appointed 3 VPs who just spent the entire year trying to destroy his reputation, the board would demand his resignation.
They would say he's inviting corporate sabotage.
You were putting the enemy inside the gates. How did Lincoln possibly view this as a strength?
It comes down to a ruthless, pragmatic assessment of what survival actually required. Lincoln understood a fundamental truth about crisis management.
Which is?
When a company or a country is facing an existential threat, you cannot afford mediocrity disguised as loyalty.
Wow.
You need the absolute sharpest, most capable minds available, period. Seward was widely recognized as the preeminent diplomat of the era.
Chase was an unmatched financial genius who could figure out how to fund a massive war.
And Bates offered crucial conservative credibility that appealed to the border states. Lincoln knew he couldn't afford a B team of yes men from Illinois.
He knew that if he left Seward and Chase outside the administration, they would immediately become powerful, well-funded critics.
Exactly. They would sit on the sidelines, sniping at his policies and fracturing the party from the outside.
So by bringing them inside the tent, he achieved two things. First, he secured their immense technical competence to run the government.
Second, and perhaps more importantly, he managed their political energy. He forced them to take ownership of the crisis.
There is an incredible quote from Lincoln that captures the sheer audacity of this cabinet.
Which one?
He described it by saying, quote, "Out of strange, discordant, and even hostile elements, we gathered from the four winds and formed and fought the battle through."
That is just so powerful.
He is literally forcing opposing, fiercely bitter political ideologies to sit at the same table and hash out the survival of the nation.
And doing this requires a staggering level of psychological security. Most leaders surround themselves with sycophants because they are deeply insecure about their own intelligence or authority.
They need constant validation.
Exactly. But Lincoln possessed the supreme self-confidence to absorb his rivals. He was entirely comfortable being the least formally educated man in the room, as long as he was the man making the final call.
This gives us a vital takeaway for anyone building a team or managing a department. Embrace diversity of thought, especially when it is deeply uncomfortable.
Yes. When you are building a corporate team in a turnaround situation, do not surround yourself with people who only tell you what you want to hear.
Hire your rivals. Invite dissenting voices. Keep your smartest, most capable critics inside the tent.
Because if they are inside the tent, you can harness their brains.
And if they're outside the tent, they're just throwing rocks at your windows.
It is incredibly taxing to manage direct reports who genuinely believe they are smarter than you, or who actively covet your title.
Oh, it has to be exhausting.
But true leadership is having the emotional bandwidth to manage that friction for the benefit of the overall mission.
So we have established the setup. He hired the rivals.
Yeah.
But it is one thing to assign them titles,
Right, the real work is ahead.
It is an entirely different beast to actually manage them day in and day out while fighting a civil war.
The boardroom battles in Lincoln's White House became notoriously intense.
Let's look at how he actually managed these massive egos on a random Tuesday morning.
Well, the discord was almost immediate. Let's start with William Henry Seward.
The East Coast elite, who assumed he was going to be president.
Right. Even after accepting the role of Secretary of State, Seward drafted a memo to Lincoln. It's famously known as Some Thoughts for the President's Consideration.
Oh, this memo is unbelievable.
Really is. In this memo, Seward essentially told Lincoln that the administration lacked a domestic and foreign policy.
Just flat out told him he had no plan.
Yes. And he broadly implied that if Lincoln wasn't capable of leading, Seward would gladly assume the absolute power necessary to do it for him.
He was basically offering to be the puppet master.
Exactly.
Which is the ultimate test of authority. A subordinate essentially writes an email to the CEO saying, "Since you don't know what you're doing, I'll just take over the company."
Right. And if Lincoln explodes and fires him publicly, he loses his best diplomat and fractures the party.
But if he submits, he loses the presidency. So how does he thread that needle?
This is where Lincoln's emotional intelligence becomes his greatest tactical weapon. He didn't leak the memo to the press to embarrass Seward.
He didn't call a massive cabinet meeting to put Seward in his place either.
No. Instead, Lincoln replied with a private, firmly worded letter. He logically dismantled Seward's arguments and then unequivocally stated that as the president, he alone would dictate policy and bear the responsibility for it.
He essentially said, "I am the boss, but this conversation never has to leave this room."
He offered him a path to back down with his dignity intact.
That is brilliant.
Yes. And from that point on, Lincoln offered Seward what historians call his silent support. He allowed Seward to feel incredibly valued.
He spent a massive amount of time with him, right?
He did, often walking over to Seward's house just to consult with him. He let Seward exert immense influence over foreign policy, but Lincoln always held the final veto.
It's the perfect blueprint for managing that one rock star developer on a tech team who thinks they know more than the project manager.
That is a great comparison.
You don't scream at them in the all-hands meeting and initiate a dominance contest. You give them a crucial, highly visible piece of the architecture to own.
You stroke their ego, you consult them frequently, but you hold the keys to the final deployment.
You manage the ego to utilize the talent.
And it worked. Seward eventually became a loyal friend. Salmon P. Chase, on the other hand, well, he never stopped plotting.
Chase was managing the Treasury, doing a brilliant job financing the war, but he was constantly maneuvering to undermine Lincoln,
He wanted to run for president in 1864, and he made no secret of it. He would frequently threaten to resign whenever a minor appointment didn't go his way.
trying to use his indispensability as a weapon against Lincoln.
Exactly. Furthermore, the cabinet was full of mutual hatred. Chase despised Edwin Stanton, the Secretary of War, and the feeling was very mutual.
How does a leader mediate that level of toxic interpersonal conflict without simply losing their mind?
Lincoln utilized a very specific, highly effective conflict resolution toolkit. First, he relied on extraordinary patience and active listening.
What did that look like in practice?
Well, when debating monumental nation-altering policies, he did not mandate immediate agreement. He invited the varying opinions, he absorbed the pushback, and he allowed these brilliant men to exhaust their arguments.
He used their intense debate to stress test and refine his own thinking.
Yes. And crucially, he understood the physiological mechanics of tension.
Explain that a bit more.
He knew that when highly ambitious men are screaming at each other about the fate of the country, cognitive rigidity sets in. People stop listening and just start defending their territory.
So they aren't even arguing the point anymore, just protecting their ego.
Exactly. To break that rigidity, Lincoln used humor.
Humor was arguably his most deployed tactical weapon, wasn't it?
Absolutely. There is a famous moment right before Lincoln presented the preliminary draft of the Emancipation Proclamation to his cabinet.
This was the most consequential, tense executive decision of the 19th century.
Unquestionably. The cabinet was tightly wound, fully aware of the gravity of the meeting. And how does Lincoln open it?
He pulls out a book by the humorist Artemus Ward.
Yes, and he reads a completely ridiculous comedic chapter out loud.
You can just imagine the Secretary of War sitting there fuming, thinking the country is literally bleeding to death and the CEO is reading us a comedy routine.
Stanton was furious, but Lincoln understood that he had to break the fight-or-flight tension in the room.
He told the cabinet, essentially, if I didn't laugh, I would die, and you need this medicine as much as I do.
By forcing them to reset their emotional state, he prepared them to actually process the monumental policy he was about to drop on the table.
It wasn't about ignoring the seriousness of the war.
Not at all. It was about managing the neurochemistry of his advisors so they could function.
He also aggressively distributed credit, which is another great tactic.
Yes, when the Treasury successfully secured a massive loan, or the military achieved a victory, Lincoln gave the credit to Chase or to his general.
He praised them generously in public.
But we need to make a very clear distinction here. Endless patience and empathy can easily cross the line into passivity and weakness.
Right. Lincoln was empathetic, but he was absolutely not a pushover.
No, his patience had a hard, violent limit.
This is the counterbalance that makes the strategy work.
Yeah.
Empathy without decisiveness is just therapy, you know.
That's very true. Lincoln was running a war. When empathy and patience failed to produce operational results, he dropped the hammer.
Let's look at how he handled General George McClellan.
Okay, McClellan was a brilliant organizer, beloved by his troops, but he had what Lincoln famously called the slows.
He refused to engage the enemy.
Right, he was constantly demanding more troops and making excuses.
McClellan even treated Lincoln with open contempt, didn't he?
He did. He once famously went to bed while the president was waiting in his parlor to speak with him.
That is insane. And Lincoln tolerated that incredible personal disrespect for months because he thought McClellan was necessary to organize the army.
But the moment Lincoln realized McClellan's hesitation was actively threatening the survival of the nation, the patience evaporated.
Lincoln fired him.
He removed him from command entirely. He proved that you can tolerate a massive amount of personal disrespect and foster endless debate, but when the core mission is compromised by incompetence, you must take decisive action.
This translates directly to our next corporate takeaway. Master the soft skills to manage hard egos.
It is so essential in modern business.
We so often view active listening, humor, and empathy as non-essential, soft HR skills. We glorify the hard-charging, table-pounding executive.
But Lincoln proves that empathy and humor are the strongest tactical tools you have for de-escalating tension and building psychological safety.
Give generous praise to the competitors on your team. Let them shine. but never shy away from making the brutal, decisive call when consensus fails and the mission is at risk.
You give them the space to argue, but you keep absolute control of the direction.
The only way a leader can execute that balance tolerating abuse without losing authority is to fundamentally detach their personal ego from their professional role.
And we find the secret to how Lincoln managed this in one specific profound phrase he used to describe his philosophy.
He stated that he viewed himself as public property.
I am now public property. It is a stunning articulation of leadership.
He was subordinating his personal pride, his ego, and his natural human need to be right entirely to the needs of the organization.
If Salmon Chase insulted him in the press, but Chase was doing a masterful job keeping the Treasury solvent to fund the army, Lincoln genuinely did not care about the insult.
His feelings were irrelevant. The mission was paramount.
He removed himself as the protagonist of the narrative. He became the vessel for the nation's survival.
This is incredibly difficult for modern executives to do.
It requires a suppression of the ego that most people spend a lifetime failing to achieve. We naturally want to retaliate when we are slighted.
But because Lincoln didn't react from a place of wounded pride, he neutralized the toxicity of his rivals.
They couldn't trigger him, and because they couldn't trigger him, he kept them focused entirely on the work.
Man, we have covered an incredible amount of ground today, tracing this journey from a dusty, disorganized law office in Springfield to an absolute masterclass in high-stakes executive management.
It really is a masterclass.
We started with this image of a guy who didn't have the resume, who lacked the Ivy League pedigree, and who wasn't the loudest guy at the networking event.
And we tracked how he channeled that generational longing to rise into structural, horizontal relationships.
He proved that quiet, strategic positioning, doing the unglamorous math of vote counting, can outmaneuver loud, premature celebration and optical dominance.
He proved that bringing your smartest, most capable critics inside the tent is a far superior survival strategy than insulating yourself with comfortable yes men.
He showed us that you can use humor, strategic patience, and extreme empathy to manage massive toxic egos,
while retaining the steel spine necessary to fire people who ultimately cannot get the job done.
The overarching lesson of this deep dive is that the most effective, enduring leadership isn't about pedigree.
It isn't about demanding absolute loyalty or silencing dissent either.
It is about authentic relationships, strategic patience, and the courage to actively manage the people who challenge you the most, utilizing their strengths to save the enterprise.
That sums it up perfectly.
Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with. As you go back to your own boardroom, your next team meeting, or your next career negotiation.
What is that final thought?
Throughout all the historical analysis, the one trait that is consistently highlighted as Lincoln's true superpower, the specific mechanism that allowed him to unite an impossible cabinet and navigate a brutal civil war, was his unique capacity for empathy.
He possessed the rare ability to truly understand the underlying motivations, fears, and ambitions of the very people who were actively trying to undermine him.
And in today's hyper-competitive corporate environments, empathy is so frequently dismissed.
It really is. It is viewed as a soft skill, a nice to have, or in cutthroat cultures, it is actively viewed as a weakness.
A lack of killer instinct. But if the man who stepped into the most catastrophic executive crisis in American history used empathy not as a blanket of comfort, but as his primary tactical weapon for survival and ultimate dominance, you have to ask yourself a hard question.
You do.
Are you currently weaponizing empathy in your own career? Are you using it as an intelligence-gathering tool to deeply understand your rivals, to build unshakable horizontal coalitions, and to navigate corporate chaos?
Yeah.
Or are you leaving your most powerful leadership tool sitting unused in the drawer? Think about that the next time you walk into a room full of rivals.